You look at your circle and a dark thought crosses your mind, don't you? You feel yourself outgrowing them. You want to build, sharpen, focus, earn, evolve. They want to complain, drink, repeat the same stories, mock ambition, and drag every serious conversation back down to the level of comfort. You already see it. Every time you try to level up, somebody gets uneasy, somebody jokes, somebody questions your change, somebody calls it ego. And then society steps in and tells you the lie that keeps millions of men chained for life. A man without friends is a loser. Stay loyal, stay available, stay reachable, stay familiar, stay small enough to be loved by people who never intend to rise. That lie exists for one reason. The system is terrified of what happens. When a man weaponizes solitude and stops asking the mediocre masses for permission to become dangerous. So if you feel guilty for wanting to cut everyone off, stay right here. Do not skip a second. Today, we open Machiavelli's playbook and expose the dark law of isolation, why elite people rely on very little social dependency, and why the man who can stand alone becomes almost impossible to control. That line should hit harder than most people are willing to admit, because it answers the forbidden question you have been avoiding. What if the loyalty your friends demand is actually just a psychological chain designed to keep you exactly as miserable as they are? What if their version of brotherhood is not support, but social containment? What if the pack was never protecting you? What if it was making sure you never moved too far beyond it? This is where most men wake up angry, because they realize they were trained to fear isolation more than stagnation. They were taught to protect old friendships even when those friendships protect old weakness. They were told that cutting people off is cruel, that outgrowing your environment is arrogance, that wanting more means you think you are better than others. But look closely. The same people preaching loyalty rarely sacrifice comfort to help you build. They want your presence, not your expansion. They want your agreement, not your transformation. They want your availability, not your elevation. And that is what this video is going to dismantle. You are going to see how stagnant circles use dark psychology to enforce sameness. You are going to understand the hidden power dynamics inside friend groups that look harmless on the surface. You are going to see why Machiavelli and Machiavellian rules still apply to modern social life. You are going to learn the law of isolation, the difference between healthy alliance and dead weight, how to cut people off without noise, and how to turn loneliness into strategic focus instead of weakness. By the end, you will not feel guilty for protecting your trajectory. You will understand why isolation, used correctly, is not exile. It is an asset. If these ideas resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more top-tier content. Also, drop a "trust no one" in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. The first truth is brutal. Most friendships are not built on shared vision. They are built on shared familiarity. Shared geography, shared habits, shared wounds, shared distractions, shared underachievement. That is why they feel so emotionally heavy and strategically empty. They were not chosen at the level of destiny. They were assembled at the level of convenience. And convenience always becomes a chain when one person starts evolving faster than the rest. You know this already. You feel it every time you become more disciplined and they call you extreme. You feel it every time you stop wasting time and they call you boring. You feel it every time you talk about business, fitness, mastery, money, vision, restraint, and they answer with sarcasm, excuses, or a joke designed to drag your seriousness back into the mud. They do not always attack directly. Most people are too cowardly for that. They use softer weapons: delay, distraction, mockery, nostalgia, emotional guilt. Your friends don't want you to succeed in a way that exposes their passivity. They want you to do just well enough to remain useful, but not well enough to force them to confront themselves. That is one of the ugliest truths in all power dynamics. A mediocre circle can tolerate your suffering. It can even bond over it. What it cannot tolerate is your transcendence, because your transcendence becomes evidence. Evidence that more was possible. Evidence that the excuses were choices. Evidence that the ceiling was imaginary. This is why the loyalty they demand often has nothing to do with virtue. It has everything to do with stasis. Remember where you came from. Don't change. You think you're too good now? Listen to the language. None of it asks whether you are becoming stronger, wiser, more disciplined, more sovereign. It asks whether you are staying familiar. Familiarity is the real religion of stagnant groups. Stop and calculate what that costs you. Every night spent managing weak social obligations is time stolen from your future. Every conversation built on complaining instead of creating lowers your standard. Every secret you reveal to people with small minds becomes a future liability. Every time you perform the old version of yourself to keep the group comfortable, you betray the life that is trying to emerge. Every minute you spend managing the fragile egos of your friends is a minute stolen from your empire. And this is where dark psychology matters, because the pressure your circle uses is often subtle enough to look innocent. Nobody says, stay small so we can feel safe. They say, you've changed. Nobody says, your ambition makes me insecure. They say, bro, relax. Nobody says, I need you stagnant so I don't feel left behind. They say, you're taking life too seriously. But beneath the phrasing, the mechanism is the same. Reduce your intensity, dilute your focus, rejoin the emotional average. That is not friendship. That is social gravity, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The guilt you feel for wanting distance is often proof that the chain worked. You were conditioned to confuse access with love. You were conditioned to believe that constant availability is loyalty. You were conditioned to think cutting people off is betrayal, even when staying connected is slowly betraying yourself. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. Machiavellian rules are not about hating people. They are about refusing illusions. They are about seeing that men speak in moral language while acting from interest. They are about seeing that affection without alignment is unstable. They are about seeing that proximity does not equal allegiance. A large friend group isn't a sign of status. It's often a sign of a massive security vulnerability. If that line bothered you, good. It means the old programming is still fighting for survival. Because the next thing you need to see is how the group punishes growth without ever admitting that punishment is taking place. And once you see that mechanism in action, your guilt starts dying fast. But understanding that they hold you back isn't enough. You need to see the mechanism. You need to see the crab bucket protocol at work. Put several crabs in a bucket, and the moment one tries to climb out, the others pull it back down. They do not do it out of strategy. They do it out of instinct. Human groups do the same thing, but with better language. You decide to stop drinking every weekend. Suddenly you are acting different. You stop chasing validation and become more private. Suddenly you are hard to read. You start making money and protecting your time. Suddenly you are selfish. You stop oversharing your plans. Suddenly you are secretive. You cut off dead conversations. Suddenly you are cold. No, you are becoming expensive to access, and people who were comfortable with your cheap availability resent the price increase. This is one of the darkest forms of social control because it hides behind humor and history. The group does not usually confront you with open hostility at first. It uses ridicule. It uses old stories. It uses remember when to lock you into a version of yourself that no longer serves you. It uses affection as an anchor. It reminds you who you used to be, not because that version was your best self, but because that version was easiest for them to understand and manage. You think you owe them loyalty because of your past. I'm going to destroy that logic right now. Your past is not a life sentence. Shared history is not shared destiny. Time invested is not proof of future value, and nostalgia is not evidence of alignment. Read that again internally if you need to, because this is where most men surrender. They say, but we've known each other for years. So what? A bad investment held for 10 years is still a bad investment. A weak environment known since childhood is still weak. Duration does not sanctify dysfunction. Length of contact is not depth of character. This is where Sigma male psychology gets marketed badly. It gets turned into performative aloofness, fake stoicism, and attention-seeking detachment. That is not what matters. Real Sigma male psychology, if the term is to mean anything useful at all, is the capacity to operate without needing the emotional permission of the crowd. It is the ability to endure temporary loneliness for long-term alignment. It is the willingness to be misunderstood by the familiar in order to become known by the future. And that requires a level of cold recognition most men avoid. Some of the people around you do not want you destroyed, but they also do not want you transformed. They want you stable enough to remain in the group, fun enough to join the ritual, weak enough to remain relatable, and available enough to help regulate their boredom. That is not brotherhood, that is group maintenance. Machiavelli warned repeatedly about self-interest because he understood that men protect what benefits them. When your old version benefits the group will defend that version, even if it is suffocating you. That is why the power dynamics change the moment you stop performing your old role. People become irritated, suspicious, and dramatic, not because you harmed them, but because their emotional economy lost one of its workers. Stop calling them friends when they only know how to engage you through addiction, distraction, or mutual stagnation. Many are simply drinking buddies, nostalgia partners, or spectators of your decline. They vanish the second you stop providing entertainment, access, or emotional labor. And if you cut them off the wrong way, they will try to punish your exit. Not always physically, usually socially, through gossip, through reframing, through the oldest defense mechanism in the world. If they cannot stop your growth, they will attack your image. So how do the elite avoid this trap? How do people who actually build anything meaningful navigate social life without becoming gullible, bitter, or trapped? To answer that, you need to understand something most men never consider. Friendship is not only emotional, it is informational, it is strategic, it is a channel of access, which means the wrong circle is not just unhelpful, it is dangerous. I'm going to show you how the elite structure their alliances, but first you need to understand why casual friendship becomes a leak. Every person with repeated access to you gathers data, your routines, your ambitions, your insecurities, your spending habits, your weak spots, your family tensions, your romantic patterns, your self-doubt, your blind spots. People collect this information even when they do not consciously realize it. That is why the wrong company becomes a security breach long before it becomes a visible betrayal. The more people who have access to your inner world, the more exposed your future becomes. This is not paranoia. This is basic strategic thinking. Machiavelli is relevant here because Machiavellian rules begin with one premise: do not confuse appearances with loyalties. Men do not become safe because they laugh with you. Men do not become trustworthy because they grew up with you. Men do not become aligned because they call you brother. Trust is not granted through history. It is earned through tested character. Machiavelli wrote about power, but power starts with controlled access. If too many people know what moves you are making, they can slow them, mock them, copy them, block them, or weaponize them later. If too many people know your weaknesses, they can apply pressure exactly where you are soft. If too many people feel entitled to your time, your focus gets fractured before it ever compounds into anything significant. This is where elite manipulation looks ordinary. The same elite manipulation people imagine happening only in politics or business is alive in your social circle. Status games, information trading, envy disguised as concern, access disguised as care, curiosity disguised as support. People ask what you are building not because they want to help, but because they want to place you inside a hierarchy that keeps their own ego safe. Machiavelli knew that self-interest is usually stronger than sentiment. Do you really trust people who celebrate your ambition only until it begins to outrun theirs? Be honest. Who gets uncomfortable when you get serious? Who starts joking when you set standards? Who only calls when they need something? Who becomes warmer when you have money and colder when you disappear? Who gossips about the people they call brothers? Who asks for honesty but punishes inconvenient truth? Who says they support you yet repeatedly invites you back into your worst habits? Your face already knows the answer before your mouth admits it, and here is the hidden cost of all this. The wrong circle does not only threaten your reputation, it drains your decision quality. When you stay overexposed, you start thinking through the eyes of others. You censor your growth. You explain your discipline, you soften your goals. You alter your timeline so that weak people do not feel abandoned by your momentum. You start shaping your life around what will be least disruptive to people who have done nothing to build it. That is not community. That is internal occupation. The king sits alone on the throne for a reason. There is no room for a +1. Now that line is metaphor, not pathology. It does not mean you must become antisocial, paranoid, or incapable of intimacy. It means the highest decisions of your life cannot be outsourced to the emotional comfort of your social circle. The throne is where accountability lives. The throne is where hard choices are made. The throne is where you decide what deserves access to your future. That is the law of isolation in its first form. Reduce unnecessary access. Protect direction. Stop mistaking visibility for connection. Stop mistaking company for support. Stop mistaking familiarity for trust. And once you stop leaking access, something interesting happens. The loneliness you feared begins to change shape. It stops feeling like abandonment and starts feeling like oxygen. But if you do not understand how to use that oxygen, you will run back to the crowd the moment the silence gets heavy. So now we move to the part most men never learn, how to turn isolation into an actual strategic advantage. This is the pivot. This is where guilt becomes permission, and permission becomes weaponization. Solitude is terrifying only to the man whose identity depends on constant reflection. If you need other people nearby to confirm you exist, then isolation feels like erasure. But if you can think, build, regulate and expand without being constantly mirrored, isolation becomes one of the greatest strategic assets you will ever possess. That is why the law of isolation matters. It is not about dramatic withdrawal for the sake of image. It is about reclaiming uninterrupted territory for your mind. It is about removing social static so your own signal gets stronger. It is about no longer having your goals negotiated by people too weak to pursue their own. You were taught to fear being alone because alone men are harder to predict, harder to market to, harder to shame, harder to control through comparison. The man always surrounded by noise is easier to shape. The man who can sit in silence and still move with certainty is a different species entirely. This is where Sigma male psychology is useful if stripped of the internet costume. Sigma male psychology is not pretending not to care. It is the discipline of self-direction without constant group validation. It is the psychological ability to walk your own path without making a speech about it. It is restraint. It is discretion. It is force under control. And that is why elite people often appear socially sparse, not because they hate others, because they understand bandwidth, because they know intimacy is expensive, because they know that every relationship creates obligations, noise, expectations, and risk, because they know a poorly chosen ally is more dangerous than an honest enemy. Power dynamics reward the man who can tolerate temporary isolation without liquidating his standards for companionship. Sit with that. The reason weak circles have so much influence over men is simple. Most men cannot endure social emptiness. They feel one lonely weekend and immediately reopen the gate. They feel one wave of guilt and send the text. They feel one night of silence and run back to the old environment just to feel recognized again. That is why they never escape. The pain of transition scares them more than the pain of stagnation, but that transition pain is where your freedom is hidden. You think you miss them. Often you miss stimulation. You think you miss the group. Often you miss distraction. You think you miss the bond. Often you miss being familiar to someone. You think you are lonely. Often you are simply detoxing from noise. This is the exact moment you will feel the guilt creeping in. Here is how to kill it. Ask one question. Does maintaining this relationship strengthen my character, sharpen my focus, protect my integrity, and respect my direction? If the answer is no, the guilt is false. It is not moral truth. It is withdrawal from a habit. That is how dark psychology keeps men in bad circles, not with chains, but with emotional distortion. You owe us. You changed. You forgot where you came from. You think you're better. Weak groups turn your evolution into your crime. That is dark psychology operating at street level. It takes your growth and frames it as disloyalty. Reject that frame. You're allowed to outgrow people. You're allowed to protect your energy. You're allowed to stop explaining yourself. You're allowed to choose silence over social obligation. You're allowed to cut people off without putting them on trial. You're allowed to prefer a small, proven alliance over a crowd of liabilities. That is not cruelty. That is curation. And here is the deeper reward. Once you stop feeding the group with your presence, your attention starts returning to you. Your reading improves, your savings improve, your discipline improves, your standards improve, your emotional stability improves, your self-respect improves. Your vision gets louder because the noise got quieter. Watch what happens to your bank account and your focus when you stop funding the social rituals that were never building anything except mutual delay. The elite do not necessarily have no relationships. They simply structure them differently. Fewer people, more testing, less disclosure, more observation, less sentimentality, more alignment. They do not trust no one in the childish sense. They trust no one blindly. They test slowly. They reveal gradually. They rely on patterns, not promises. That is Machiavelli in mature form, not theatrics, not cynicism for its own sake. Discernment, controlled access, strategic distance, a refusal to let emotional language override evidence. But knowing this is still not enough, because eventually you must act. Eventually you must reduce access, redraw the map, and execute the separation. And if you do it sloppily, the group will turn your hesitation into a rope around your neck. So let's make it practical. Now we move from theory to operation. If you are going to cut people off, do it like a strategist, not like a wounded teenager. No manifesto, no dramatic speech, no cryptic posts, no public insults, no need to teach them a lesson. That is emotional leakage, and emotional leakage gives away the frame. The Machiavellian way is cleaner. First, classify. Not everyone belongs in the same category. Some people are merely old acquaintances. Some are situational allies. Some are good-hearted but no longer aligned. Some are actively corrosive. Some are loyal but limited. Some are useful professionally and nowhere else. Some are genuine and rare. If you treat every contact like a soulmate or every disappointment like a betrayal, you will either overattach or overreact. Create 4 levels in your mind. Inner circle, proven through time, confidentiality, reciprocity, and character under pressure. Operational allies, useful, respectful, but not emotionally central. Peripheral contacts, cordial, limited, no deep access. Access denied, draining, envious, manipulative, chaotic, or repeatedly disrespectful. This alone will change your life because clarity kills guilt. Second, reduce access before you announce distance. Share less, reply slower. Stop volunteering plans. Stop explaining your schedule. Stop attending rituals that make you smaller. Stop funding dynamics that revolve around alcohol, complaints, gossip, and repetition. If the relationship only survives through constant maintenance from you, let it starve and see what remains. Third, observe the reaction. This is where the truth always comes out. Healthy people respect boundaries. Unhealthy people interrogate them. Healthy people adjust. Unhealthy people guilt trip. Healthy people remain stable when your availability drops. Unhealthy people punish the shift because they lost control of your time. That reaction tells you more than years of conversation. Fourth, when a direct conversation is necessary, be brief and calm. I'm focusing on different priorities. I'm tightening my circle. I'm protecting my time. I wish you well. That is enough. The more you explain, the more material you provide for elite manipulation, gossip, and narrative theft. Short explanations preserve frame control. If they accuse you, do not defend excessively. If they mock you, do not educate them. If they guilt you, do not negotiate. If they smear you, do not panic. Consistency is stronger than rebuttal. If you cut them off the wrong way, they will try to destroy your reputation. Here is the Machiavellian way to survive that. Say little, stay steady, improve visibly. Let time expose the contrast. Most social attacks burn out when they cannot harvest your reaction. You do not have to win every narrative. You have to win your direction. This is the exact moment you will be tempted to reopen doors just to reduce tension. Don't. Tension is often the price of reordering your life. And now, the guilt. Let's finish it. You do not owe permanent access because someone knew you in your weaker years. You do not owe your future to people who only honor your past. You do not owe endless loyalty to anyone whose presence requires your decline. You do not owe intimacy to people who resent your standards. You do not owe attendance to rituals that weaken your mind. The law of isolation is not about becoming loveless. It is about becoming non-negotiable. This is where Sigma male psychology, again, gets simplified by people who want shortcuts. There is no shortcut. There is only repetition, repeatedly choosing long-term alignment over short-term comfort, repeatedly choosing quiet over noise, repeatedly choosing design over drift, repeatedly choosing a few solid allies over a crowd of liabilities, repeatedly cutting people off when evidence is clear, not when emotion peaks. And yes, the room will get quieter. Good. Quiet is where you hear your own hierarchy again. Quiet is where you stop socializing your ambition to death. Quiet is where the future starts getting louder than the past. This is also where your finances and focus begin to change. Less random spending, less social debt, less wasted time, less recovery from pointless nights, less explanation, more sleep, more reading, more training, more output, more momentum, more self-respect. That is not fantasy. That is arithmetic. The elite appear isolated because they understand cost. They understand that every person in your orbit taxes your attention. They understand that uncontrolled social access destroys strategic clarity. They understand that too many friends means too many emotional negotiations. And they understand a truth ordinary men are trained to fear. Loneliness is temporary, but misalignment compounds. So the purge is not just subtraction, it is infrastructure. It is the removal of dead weight so your real velocity can finally appear. And once you feel that velocity, once your mind clears, once your days become cleaner, once your standards stop being argued with by the least impressive voices in your environment, you will realize something almost embarrassing in hindsight. You were never afraid of being alone. You were afraid of meeting yourself without witnesses. Now you can. You were burdened by a circle that called itself support, while slowly taxing your ambition, draining your focus, and treating your growth like betrayal. Then came recognition. You saw that much of what was called loyalty was actually social containment. You saw that your guilt was not proof that you were wrong, but proof that the old chain had sunk deep. Then came anger, and that anger was necessary because it showed you how long you had been paying with your future to keep the mediocre comfortable. Then came validation. Yes, some of these people mattered once. Yes, some history was real. Yes, some memories were genuine. But memory does not override evidence, and affection does not cancel misalignment. Then came permission. Permission to outgrow, permission to protect, permission to cut people off without turning your life into a courtroom drama. And now comes weaponization. You understand the law of isolation. You understand Machiavelli. You understand Machiavellian rules in their most useful form. Trust no one blindly. Test everyone slowly. Disclose little. Observe much. And never let the comfort of a crowd outrank the direction of your life. That is how the burdened friend becomes the isolated king. Not because he hates people, because he finally understands selection. Because he finally understands that a throne is not a party. Because he finally understands that power dynamics punish the man who needs too much approval and protect the man who can stand alone without collapsing into panic. So here is the final challenge. Execute the purge and do not look back. Not recklessly, not theatrically, precisely. Remove access where access has become a liability. Stop feeding the old rituals. Stop confusing nostalgia with destiny. Stop giving your future to people whose highest ambition is to keep you familiar. Cut people off where the evidence is clear. Protect your time, protect your plans, protect your mind and make it real. Comment, trust no one if you are done confusing loyalty with chains. Comment, trust no one if you are done financing the comfort of people who resent your growth. Comment, trust no one if you are ready to choose solitude over sabotage. If you want more of this, subscribe. This is not content for people addicted to social approval. This is for men building internal empires, for men studying Machiavelli, dark psychology, Sigma male psychology, and hard power dynamics so they can stop being socially managed by weaker minds. For men who understand that elite manipulation does not begin in palaces. It begins in ordinary rooms, with ordinary people, using ordinary guilt to keep extraordinary potential obedient. If you are done living that way, subscribe and keep training. And whatever you do, do not stop here. The video on your screen is the next layer. It will show you what happens after you remove the noise, because cutting people off is only the first step. Then comes the harder question. What do you do with the silence once you finally own it? Watch the next video while this mindset is active, while your standards are high, while the old guilt is still dying. See what others miss, know what others fear, become who others can't.